Hello everybody. Welcome to the presentation on Cold War, Consumerism, and Conformity. You'll find all of the videos from this presentation on Moodle through my YouTube page with the same name, Cold War, Consumerism, and Conformity. Okay, so the 1950s is highlighted by the Cold War, Consumerism, and Conformity. It very much has some similar characteristics as the 1920s, as we've talked about before. So let's carry on. So it starts off before the 1950s. We have to go a little bit back, a little bit earlier, to the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was a project developed by scientists of the United States and scientists of Europe in order to build the atomic bomb before the Germans. Some of the famous scientists involved were Einstein. Now, this is going to be important because the United States was the first country to develop the atomic bomb and the first country to have ever dropped a nuclear bomb, and the only time, twice. So let's talk about Harry Truman. Harry Truman takes over for FDR after his death, and he's sworn in near the end of the war in 1945. He is well known for being the person to give the order to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. Although civil rights legislation was limited, he did pass Executive Orders 9881, which was the desegregation of the armed forces. However, this took until after the Korean War to actually happen. So prior to that, there was segregation in all branches of the military. Okay, so you'll be watching this video here, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, later on, sorry, next slide. But here's a picture from Hiroshima. Okay, so there's multiple reasons, and historians have multiple reasons for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we want to write these down. One, it is argued from the American side that this would save lives. It would save lots of American lives if they were have to invade through land invasion and occupy Japan. Also, they would have to divide Japan up with Russia if they waited for any of the Allied powers. This is a problem. And finally, it was to exhibit their power and might through the dropping of the atomic bomb. Now, they only had limited bombs. If they were to give a warning and then drop the bomb and the bomb turned out to be a dud, this would be a problem as well. So you're going to watch this video here, and take your time, and listen to the personal accounts of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. That's my girl in the background, laughing away. All right, next then we have another significant turning point in the start of the Cold War. This is Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech. So listen to his language and listen to the fears that he tries to instill in the American public. Now, these fears carried on through much of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So even when I was a kid, slightly younger than you, there was fears of atomic bombs, nuclear bombs, and nuclear war. All right, very important. In 1947, in order to deal with problems of Europe after the war, Truman came up with the Truman Doctrine, and this was to supply aid to countries of Europe. Now, what this did, in the case of Greece, they gave $38 million to Britain to fight communist rebels. The United States was more than willing to finance corrupt capitalist regimes so long as they kept markets open. Now, this was based on the idea of George Kennan's idea of containment. Okay? And we'll get into that shortly later. But it was the idea of containing communism. They didn't want communism to spread. So watch this video on the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was responsible for $13 billion in economic aid for Europe between 1948 and 1951. And the Soviets countered with the Molotov Plan, but that was just more in sort of just for the sake of following up. Well, you did it, I'm going to do it too. Yeah, and this is a much different approach after World War I, where they blamed Germany for World War I and made them pay reparation payments or payments for being guilty. And this is what caused the world to go into an economic downturn in the 20s and the 30s, causing the Great Depression. So this time they're going to sort of fight with money rather than bullets. So here's George Kennan. So he's famous for writing a long telegram. So in this long telegram, signed with the letter X, he stated that the United States needed to contain communism within its sphere of influence through helping foreign countries with financial aid. So if they could stop the spread of communism, all the better. All right, so now here's where the arms race starts. The Soviets build their atomic bomb, and this is where the arms race starts. And this is going to freak out the American public. This is going to lead to this sort of conformity and Cold War fears of the 50s and, as I said, 60s, 70s, and 80s. All right, so in June 20, I think it was June 25th, 1950, the United States goes to war in Korea. This is to stop the spread of communism. But what they do is they go into the South and they keep pushing north. And when they push north, then they get the Chinese involved. And the Chinese sort of push them back until we have the Korean that we know today. The divide between the north, which being the communist north, and the capitalist south. All right, so here on the left we have a bunker. These are not necessarily common, but people were building bunkers in the 1950s. And if we see in the picture, they have their supplies in their ration, canned water, food, survival supplies. So on the right, this is a video. Again, you'll find it in your Moodle on my page. And I want you to watch the propaganda and how they sort of indoctrinated this culture of fear in the 1950s. All right, so after the atomic bomb, the United States developed the hydrogen bomb, and the hydrogen bomb has greater capabilities and more destruction and power than the atomic bomb. They do this testing in the Pacific Islands and disrupt many of the local inhabitants there. And they're not going to test it in their own area. All right, so the main president of the 1950s is Dwight Eisenhower. He was an ex-general, and he was a conservative. He was also anti-communist. He was a Christian, and he told people about the importance of having Christian values. So we'll get to that later in another class. But he warned citizens of the military-industrial complex. So this is the idea that the United States industry is based around the military, and in order to keep the businesses going, and companies that manufacture arms and weapons of mass destruction, you need war. Yeah. And so he supported Vietnam and to maintain markets open. Okay. All right, so the television age, very important. So if you notice at the bottom, there's also the age of the first credit card, age of conformity, television, loads of televisions overnight. Majority of homes by the 1960s had televisions, sometimes 2 televisions. The #1 periodical or magazine during this time was TV Guide. I Love Lucy was one of the very first programs on, and it was a way of marketing and also media manipulation and teaching people American values through television. Yeah, so this is in New York. Long Island specifically was the first Levittown, and these were sort of prefab homes. You could make them very quickly and in a rapid rate, and everything sort of what we call cookie cutter. They all look the same. They're all chopped up with the same sort of cookie cutter mold. Right? And this is going to be very important because this is where ideas of America will be shaped. Churches will be able to be close by, very much a family structure, but white people only in these suburbs for the most part. Black people aren't necessarily welcome. In fact, if you're from a certain area, you could not apply to get a cheap and easy mortgage. So I want you to watch this video on the life of the suburbs and take note of sort of life in the suburbs and the life, I guess you could say the good life in many cases, for some. All right, so what would the world be with a little bit of propaganda? So in the 1950s, with the developments of television and film, comes along propaganda, and propaganda becomes very strong during this time period. The 1950s is a very powerful period of manipulation. So I want you to watch this and see how they depict communism. So these are what we call the culture of fear. So during this time, lots of films, plays, books are created which are anti-communism. So this is the Red Scare. This is a second wave of the Red Scare, same as the 1920s, except because of the developments in technology, they get better at sort of freaking people out. So this is one of my favorites of all time. Don't take chances with pickups. VD is not for victory. It's not Victory Day. Loose women may also be loaded with diseases. But this is the public service announcement. So there's lots of public service announcements that are developed through Cornet Films in the 1950s. They teach people how to live. They teach people what to be afraid of. They teach about social fears and anxieties and what women are supposed to do, and scaring people of homosexuality. It's very interesting stuff. Anti-communism in government. So in 1947, Truman banned all communists or people affiliated with communism from holding government jobs. Yeah. So in University of California, you had to swear an anti-communist oath, and same with working in government. And then they looked to remove all homosexuals. Right? So here it is. So this is everybody write this down, the Lavender Scare, Executive Order 10450. So this is banning all homosexuals from working in government for private contractors working for the US government. It was this belief that they were somehow deviant to society. All right, so everybody write this down. This is the House of Un-American Activities Committee. House of Un-American Activities Committee. And what they did was look for people who were deemed to be un-American. So as you can guess probably by this video, communists were seen as un-American. Homosexuals are seen as un-American. And like we talked about before, if you were a communist, that likely meant that you were an atheist. Yeah? So it's this idea that to be Christian meant to, or be American meant to be a Christian. All right. Here's the House of Un-American Activity Committees again. So they have investigations, they remove people's passports, they blackballed people or blacklisted people from ever getting work. There is a group of Hollywood producers and directors that lost their jobs and often lost their livelihoods. This particular individual, Paul Robeson, was the first African-American All-American. He went to Rutgers University. He was a opera singer, very eloquent speaker, very eloquent speaker. So I want you to watch this video on Paul Robeson and what they call HUAC, the HUAC. And you'll notice that Jackie Robinson was the individual who, I guess we would say, throw him under the bus or tattletaled on him. Right. Finally, one of the most divisive characters in the 1950s is Joseph McCarthy, and he's a Republican senator from Wisconsin. He kind of looks like Ted Cruz, eh? So he led most of these charges against people, and he made accusations of being disloyal or treasonous and subversion, and he said that there was numerous communists working in the government. Now what he did is he went a little bit too far, and he said that there's loads of communists working for the American military. And for a while he was seen as a political tool, but he sort of pushed a little bit too far. But what he does is he highlights this fear and the fear-mongering of the 1950s. Also, he was a Catholic, and this was a time when a Catholic got to put Protestants on trial. Yeah, so like a political inquiry or like inquisition. All right, so everybody watch this video later and be able to identify what McCarthyism is. All right, now the end of McCarthy followed an interview. So here we have the power of technology having maybe, I guess, a positive effect in this case. And Edward Murrow was a very famous, long famous radio host and then television host and journalist. And so he had an interview with McCarthy, and this is what pretty much ruined McCarthy in the public eye. All right, and finally, in 1957, Sputnik, yeah, this is my Russian accent, rotates around the globe. Okay, and by doing so, it kind of freaks out the Americans. Now, one, they think that they're being watched by the Soviets, and also, two, the Soviets are making greater scientific advancements, and there's a fear that the United States is not keeping up intellectually. So when you have mass conformity, you're not really open to much thinking. And this was the case in, say, the United States. Now, that's not to say that communism and the USSR did not have conformity, but there was some concern that the United States